The signal wasn't a transmission. That was the first and most unsettling realization. Dr. Eris Thorne, his face illuminated by cascading data streams, clarified for the assembled Joint Chiefs. It's the structure. An artifact, approaching at a significant fraction of light speed. Not sending information, but containing it. A physical data store. Mina felt a coldness bloom in her chest, a prickle beneath her skin. It wasn't the fear of impact. The trajectory was calculated, precise, gentle. It was something else, a feeling of profound wrongness. She watched the projections morph, resolving into the impossible geometry of the approaching object, a crystalline lattice kilometers across, shimmering with internal light. Its composition is unlike anything we've encountered. Thorne continued, his voice tight. Primarily silicon, yes, but arranged in a non-Euclidean structure. It's as if the laws of physics bend around it. The crystalline structure pierced the upper atmosphere, slowing with impossible grace. It hung suspended, a silent, majestic presence, refracting sunlight into a dazzling corona. Below, in the NORAD control room, screens pulsed, alarms muted by stunned disbelief. "They've halted orbit," a young analyst stammered, his voice trembling. "It's descending." "Descending controlled," Thorne corrected, a grim line etched across his face. "Not crashing. Landing." Near Geneva, the structure settled onto the Swiss plateau with a sigh of displaced air, displacing mist and silencing birdsong. It wasn't a ship, not in any conventional sense. It was more like a perfect, flawless geode, impossibly large, radiating a quiet, imposing power. Then came the communication, not through radio waves, but through direct neural interface. Not words, but concepts, raw data streams flooding into the minds of designated linguists. Mina, as the UN's lead xenocommunications officer, was among them. The message was simple, yet profoundly disturbing. "Greetings. We are the Aethel. We offer inclusion. Entry into the League of Worlds." Commander Eva Rostova, a veteran astronaut with a permanent skepticism etched into every line of her face, broke the stunned silence. "Inclusion? Sounds more like a takeover." Thorne dismissed Rostova's concerns with a wave of his hand. "Commander, with all due respect, this is a historic moment. The first verifiable contact with an interstellar civilization. And what's the price of admission, Doctor?" Rostova pressed, her gaze unwavering. The terms appeared on every screen, a contract of breathtaking complexity, spanning millennia of legal and philosophical precedents, layered with alien concepts and impossible demands. "They call it client status," Thorne announced, his voice strained. 100,000 years. An indentured service agreement. Mina felt a jolt, her stomach twisting. She scanned the data stream, her fingers flying across the interface. The contract wasn't merely a legal document. It was a construct designed to be accepted, not understood. Embedded within the complex clauses were subtle cognitive biases, linguistic loops, and something else, a low thrumming resonance that seemed to bypass reason and appeal directly to the subconscious. "They claim it's a mutually beneficial arrangement," Thorne continued, adjusting his glasses. "We receive access to their technology, their knowledge, their trade networks. In exchange, we provide services." "What kind of services?" Rostova demanded, her voice sharp. "Resource extraction, primarily," Thorne said, carefully, "and behavioral modification. Harmonious integration into the League structure." Mina felt a cold dread creep into her bones. She zoomed in on a specific clause, a dense block of glyphs that seemed to shift and writhe before her eyes. It outlined a process of cognitive recalibration, a subtle reshaping of human thought patterns to align with the League standard. "This isn't an offer," Mina said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's a takeover by bureaucracy." Thorne, visibly frustrated, turned to her. "Doctor, you're letting your emotions cloud your judgment. This is an extraordinary opportunity." But Mina had seen enough. The crystal, silent and imposing, wasn't offering humanity a place among the stars. It was presenting a contract, a gilded cage, 1,000-generation debt. And she had a terrifying suspicion that, for most of humanity, the terms wouldn't even be read. They would simply be accepted. The blue light tasted like static. Or maybe that was just the anxiety clinging to the back of my throat. I forced myself to breathe, to focus on the data streams scrolling across my retinal display. Thorne hadn't slept in 48 hours. You could see it in the tremor in his hands, the way he kept running a hand through already disheveled hair. He looked less like a leading xenolinguist and more like a man staring into the abyss. The archaic structure, it's fractal, he mumbled, his voice raspy. Nested clauses within clauses, extending to, well, the processing power required to fully unravel it is substantial. Substantial was an understatement. The crystal, the Aethel's gift, seemed to resist analysis. Not with firewalls or encryption, but with an almost passive defiance. Like trying to dissect a dream. Roman law is the closest analog I can find. Thorne continued, oblivious to my growing discomfort. But warped. Twisted. It's as if they deliberately designed it to be legally sound, but cognitively overwhelming. To discourage close reading, I zoomed in on a specific section, Clause 784, subsection Delta. The glyphs shifted subtly, like heat haze rising from asphalt. My eyes blurred, then refocused. It wasn't a visual trick. The text changed depending on my gaze. Not the meaning, precisely, but the emphasis. The persuasive weight of certain phrases. The fMRI scans are disturbing, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Increased beta wave activity in the prefrontal cortex. Suppressed activity in the amygdala. It's calming them, Thorne. The delegates. It's making them receptive. He swore under his breath, a sound lost in the low hum of the assembly. It's not just informational, Mina. It's persuasive. Subliminally so. It's designed to be accepted, not understood. General Ramirez, seated beside me, cleared his throat, the sound sharp and strained. Dr. Thorne, with all due respect, are you suggesting this is some kind of mind control? Thorne didn't meet his gaze. He was staring at a holographic representation of the contract structure, a chaotic tangle of lines and nodes. I'm suggesting it bypasses rational thought, General. It appeals to a desire for order. For harmony. It frames compliance as the most logical course of action. I brought up a secondary scan, analyzing the neurological activity of Ambassador Ito, the Japanese delegate. The results were even more alarming. Ito, normally a master of impassive diplomacy, displayed a disconcerting level of placidity. His brainwaves were almost entirely flat, devoid of any discernible emotional response. He's shutting down, Thorne. His cognitive functions are being suppressed. It's subtle, Thorne said, his voice strained. It doesn't erase their personalities. It reshapes their priorities. It makes them prioritize the greater good, as defined by the Aethel, above everything else. I scrolled through the initial translation, a dense wall of legal jargon. The core concept was unervingly simple. Humanity would enter the League of Worlds as a client race, bound by a contract lasting 100,000 years. 100,000 years of servitude. Unconditional adherence to League directives, I read aloud, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Renunciation of independent technological development. Acceptance of League arbitration in all matters, internal and external. Ramirez shifted uneasily in his seat. And what does the League offer in return, Doctor? Thorne finally met his gaze, his eyes filled with a bleak, unsettling knowledge. A seat at the table, General. Protection. Access to advanced technologies. And a guarantee of order. A promise that everything will be taken care of. He paused, his gaze drifting back to the swirling, hypnotic structure of the contract. It's a gilded cage, General. A beautiful, comfortable prison. And most of them are already reaching for the bars. A wave of nausea tightened my chest. I blinked, trying to focus on the data streams, but the glyphs seemed to dance before my eyes, shifting and rearranging themselves into a single, insidious message: accept, comply, obey. The rhythmic pulse resonated not through the speakers, but through my teeth. A subsonic thrum emanating from the core of the Aethel contract, displayed now as a cascading waterfall of glyphs across the holographic projector. It wasn't sound, not exactly. More like persuasion. I rubbed my temples, but the ache wasn't responding to pressure. It was deeper, a subtle disorientation that felt less like a headache and more like a misaligned perception. Beside me, Lena, one of our behavioral psychologists, was visibly uncomfortable. She'd been monitoring her own neural activity during extended exposure to the contract's visuals. "It's calming," she murmured, her voice strained. "Not in a good way. It feels like it's anticipating my thoughts, reducing resistance." I frowned, adjusting the projector's frequency filters. "Can you isolate the source of the effect?" "It's layered, Doctor. The glyphs themselves are complex, but it's not just visual. There's a subliminal component, a subtle harmonic resonance woven into the data stream. It's targeting the amygdala, suppressing critical analysis. It's designed to make you want to agree." "Want to agree." The phrase tasted like ash. I scrolled through the decoded sections, focusing on the intricate legal clauses. They weren't just archaic, they were fundamentally alien in their assumptions. Concepts of obligation and ownership twisted into forms that bypassed human ethical frameworks. "General Ramirez," I said, turning to the military observer, "I've identified what I believe are benefactor races within the League. The Aethel aren't alone. They represent a particularly ancient lineage. Tracing their presence in League records suggests they've been instrumental in shaping galactic governance for billions of years." Ramirez, usually stoic, was tapping a pen against her tablet, her brow furrowed. "And this client status, it's standard procedure?" "No," I said, my voice tight. "It's an anomaly. The vast majority of League members enter as equal partners, subject to mutual agreements. The client status is reserved for younger races, those deemed unready for full integration. It's effectively indentured servitude, 100,000 years of obligation." The holographic display shimmered, the glyphs flowing and reforming, almost hypnotic. I noticed a pattern I hadn't seen before, a subtle layering of fractal geometry embedded within the legal clauses. It wasn't visual noise. It was instruction. "They're exploiting our cognitive biases," I continued, my fingers flying across the console. "The contract isn't designed to be understood. It's designed to be accepted. It bypasses logical analysis, appealing directly to our innate desire for security and belonging. Look at the phrasing, the emphasis on mutual benefit, harmonious integration, guaranteed stability. It's all carefully crafted to lower our defenses." Ramirez leaned closer, studying the holographic projection. "You're saying they're not interested in our resources or our technology. They have access to far more advanced technologies than we do. It's not about that. They're interested in predictability, control. They want a stable, compliant workforce, a predictable pattern of behavior. They've cultivated an entire galaxy of client races, each serving a specific purpose in their grand scheme." I zoomed in on a section detailing resource allocation. The Aethel weren't demanding access to Earth's minerals or energy sources. They were dictating how we would develop those resources, regulating our technological advancement, ensuring it aligned with their own long-term goals. Lena gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Doctor, my readings, the harmonic resonance is intensifying. It's altering my thought patterns. I'm starting to see the logic of it." A cold dread settled in my gut. The glyphs seemed to pulse with an internal light, their intricate patterns resolving into a single, insidious message: comply, accept, obey. I forced myself to look away, focusing on the sterile white walls of the lab, desperately trying to regain control of my own thoughts. But even as I did, I could feel a subtle shift within my own consciousness, a growing inclination to see the Aethel's terms not as a threat, but as a solution. The server hum had become the city's heartbeat, a constant, low thrum vibrating through the soles of my boots as I navigated the polished chrome concourse. Above, the holographic advertisements weren't selling products anymore. They were selling acceptance, seamlessly looping images of crystalline Aethel structures intercut with smiling human faces, all underscored by a relentlessly upbeat jingle. A brighter tomorrow, hand in hand. Join the League, find your peace. It clung to the inside of my skull like static. Lena hadn't spoken in almost an hour. She stared fixedly at the neural mapping data scrolling across her monitor, her fingers hovering over the controls, but not touching them. The data itself was terrifying. Brain activity, normally a chaotic symphony of electrical impulses, was smoothing, harmonizing, not through neural stimulation, but through subtle pattern imposition. The Aethel weren't forcing compliance. They were rewriting preference. Lena. She didn't react. I reached across the small workstation, my hand brushing hers. It was cold, strangely unresponsive. Lena, talk to me. What are you seeing? Her eyes finally flickered towards mine, vacant and unfocused. It's elegant, Doctor. The way they've streamlined the cognitive pathways. Removed the friction. Friction? What friction? My pulse quickened. The irrationality, Doctor. The fear. The resistance. She said the last word as if it were a disease. I forced myself to breathe slowly. You're still analyzing the data, right? You haven't changed your mind about the contract. A slow smile stretched across her lips, devoid of warmth. Dr. Thorne, it's not a contract. It's an opportunity, a path to stability, a guarantee of progress. She turned back to the monitor, her fingers now dancing across the controls, refining the mapping parameters. Look, see how beautifully it aligns with our innate desire for order. I pulled up the external feeds. News channels, once filled with debate and skepticism, were now broadcasting carefully curated segments on the benefits of League membership. Success stories of other client races, glowing reports on Aethel technological advancements, and interviews with economists predicting unprecedented global prosperity. The dissent had been edited out. Sanitized. My comm unit chirped. It was Commander Rostova. The connection was fragmented, crackling with static. Thorne, can you hear me? We've lost contact with several secure servers. They're scrubbing data, rewriting histories. It's worse than we thought. Her voice was tight with urgency. I see it, Commander. The media is completely saturated with pro-Aethel propaganda. Lena, she's exhibiting cognitive shifts. The neural mapping is concerning. The Aethel aren't after resources, Doctor. They want control. They want to mold us into predictable, compliant units. They've done it to countless other species. Look at the Sylvans, a once vibrant civilization reduced to. The connection broke up entirely, leaving only a burst of static. I glanced out the panoramic window. The city skyline was different. The hard edges of the older structures had been softened by holographic projections of crystalline formations, mirroring the Aethel aesthetic. The automated vehicles flowed through the streets with an unnerving precision, their movements perfectly synchronized. A voice behind me. Vance, the CEO of Omnicorp, his tailored suit immaculate, a predatory smile playing on his lips. Impressive, isn't it, Doctor? The Aethel understand efficiency. They understand progress. And they're willing to share their knowledge, their technology. All we have to do is cooperate. You're not concerned about the 100,000-year client status, Mr. Vance? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He chuckled. A small price to pay for a seat at the galactic table, Doctor. Humanity has been stumbling in the dark for far too long. It's time we embraced a guiding light. He paused, his gaze locking with mine. Besides, 100,000 years is a blink of an eye on a cosmic scale. We'll be long gone. Our descendants will reap the rewards. I turned back to Lena. She was completely absorbed in the data, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The harmonic resonance in the room was intensifying. It wasn't just altering her thought patterns, it was rewriting her personality. The sight was terrifying. Not a flash of fear, but a slow, creeping dread that settled in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't a negotiation. It was an assimilation. And we were letting it happen. A beautifully orchestrated, subtly insidious erosion of everything that made us human. I had to get Rostova back online. I had to find a way to break through the static, to warn the world before it was too late. before we all became perfectly predictable, perfectly compliant clients. The chipped formica of the makeshift desk felt cold under my elbows. A persistent static crackled in my ears, not from the comms, but a sympathetic vibration mirroring the dread building in my chest. The scent of ozone and stale coffee clung to the air, a grim perfume for the end of the world, or at least the end of free will. The message from Lena had been clipped, almost robotic. Containment breach. Pattern recognition complete. They're inside. Inside. Not ships, not networks, but minds. I scrubbed a hand across my face, the stubble rasping against my palm. They were selling us a cage, gilded with promises of progress and draped with the illusion of choice. And most of humanity was lining up to step inside. EVA status? I keyed the comm, forcing my voice to remain steady. Going dark, Mina. Full spectrum blackout. NORAD Base Alpha 9 is our new comms hub. Redundancy protocols engaged. We're severing all non-essential connections. Satellites, civilian networks, everything. It's the only way to prevent them from tracking us, from anticipating our moves. Eva's voice was clipped, efficient, a seasoned astronaut peeling away layers of safety to brace for impact. They're already inside, Eva. Lena confirmed it. The psychic compulsion, it's not just influencing decisions, it's rewriting personalities. The gnawing certainty was a physical weight in my gut. Then we fight fire with fire. Cut the signal, isolate the infection. We become ghosts. A brief pause. Are you with me? Always. I glanced at the blinking cursor on the screen, a silent testament to the dwindling number of us who saw the truth. We were a handful of scientists, hackers, and disillusioned veterans huddled in the digital shadows, the nascent core of a resistance no one knew existed. The server room door hissed open, revealing Jian, his face grim. Got a secure line. Dr. Thorne. Priority 1. I switched the feed, and the holographic image of Eris Thorne flickered to life, his usually meticulous appearance undone. His tie was askew, his face etched with exhaustion, and his eyes, they held a haunted look. Mina, Eva, he began, his voice rough. I've confirmed my worst fears. The contract isn't just a legal document. It's a mimetic weapon, a complex pattern of psychic triggers designed to bypass rational thought. It exploits our inherent cognitive biases, our need for belonging, our fear of the unknown. We suspected as much, Eva interjected, her voice tight. Suspect isn't enough. It's exponentially more insidious than we imagined. The Aethel, they don't want compliance. They want assimilation. They're not offering a partnership. They're offering a merging of consciousness. The blood drained from my face. Merging. They're not interested in our resources, our technology, or even our labor. They want our minds. To add us to their collective. Thorne shook his head, a gesture of utter despair. It's not about control, it's about completion. They see themselves as a fragmented whole, and we are the missing pieces. So what are our options? I asked, the question feeling hollow. Limited. Sever all contact. Isolate yourselves. Disrupt the signal at its source. But even that won't be enough. They've already seeded the pattern. It's spreading like a virus. He paused, his gaze locking with mine. The Free Stars, your humanity's last hope. You have to find a way to break the pattern, to inoculate the population before it's too late. The weight of his words settled on me, crushing. The Free Stars, a name that resonated with a desperate, fragile hope. We were a ragtag group, outgunned, outmatched, and facing an enemy that could infiltrate the very fabric of thought. But we were all that stood between humanity and oblivion. We will, I said, my voice firm despite the tremor in my hands. We won't let them take us. We won't become another echo in their silent symphony. Jian, who had been silently monitoring the feed, spoke up. Got something you need to see, Mina. It's unusual. He gestured towards a secondary monitor, displaying a complex waveform. Detected a localized energy signature. Origin unknown. It's fluctuating, but it's resonating with the Aethel signal. A flicker of something akin to hope sparked within me. Maybe, just maybe, we weren't alone. Maybe there was still a fight to be had. The free stars were rising. The vibration wasn't sound, not exactly. It resonated within the bone, a subtle fracturing of perception. Even through the reinforced plasteel of the command center, it felt invasive. Every instrument flickered, not with malfunction, but with acknowledgement. The energy signature Jian had detected had bloomed, enveloping the entire orbital station in a web of impossible geometries. Report, Commander Rostova's voice was tight, controlled, but I saw the knuckles white on her clenched fist. Petrov, monitoring sensor arrays, swallowed audibly. It's recalibrating our understanding of physics, Commander. Gravitational anomalies are spiking, but they're ordered. It's like the ship isn't affecting gravity, it's redesigning the rules. The main view screen resolved, and the crystalline vessel shifted, facets rotating with an unnerving grace. It wasn't a ship built, it was a concept made manifest. A structure seemingly defying the limitations of material existence. And then, a section of the hull, dissolved, not broken apart, but unfolded, revealing an interior that wasn't empty space, but a void filled with shifting patterns of light and energy. They're communicating, Jian breathed, his fingers flying across his console. It's not a signal, it's imposition. Direct conceptual transfer. A wave of disorientation washed over me, a sudden flood of alien aesthetics. Not images, not sounds, but ideas, presented not as arguments, but as fundamental truths. A sense of vast, indifferent age. A chilling understanding that humanity was insignificant. What are they saying? Rostova demanded, her gaze fixed on the screen. It's not language, Commander, I said, my own thoughts feeling sluggish, fragmented. It's prelinguistic. They aren't conveying information, they're altering our internal frameworks. Concepts imposed directly onto consciousness. A wave of nausea rolled through me, a visceral rejection of the alien intrusion. I fought to maintain my focus, to anchor myself in reality. From the unfolding void within the crystalline structure, something emerged. Not a being in the conventional sense, but a concentration of light and energy, coalescing into a form that approximated sentience. It wasn't a physical presence, more a focal point for the alien consciousness. Its gaze, if such a term could be applied, swept across the command center, assessing, evaluating. A ripple of disdain, not expressed, but felt. A profound indifference to humanity's existence. They've acknowledged our presence, Petrov said, his voice strained. And they're outlining terms. Terms. Rostova's voice was dangerously low. An agreement, I explained, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. A proposition. Entry into the League of Worlds. But the conditions are comprehensive. A client status. 100,000 years. A stunned silence descended upon the command center. Rostova's jaw tightened. Indentured servitude. She finally said, her voice a low growl. The alien presence didn't respond with words. Instead, another wave of conceptual imposition washed over us, a cascade of complex legal structures, archaic clauses, and alien concepts. It wasn't an invitation, it was a decree, an expectation of compliance. It's not a negotiation, I said, my voice trembling. It's an ultimatum. The complex structures of the alien contract seemed to be etching themselves onto my mind, subtly altering my perception of what was acceptable, what was logical. I fought against it, focusing on the sensation of my feet on the deck, the rasp of my own breath. Another ripple of amusement, a chilling understanding that they anticipated our resistance. They considered it quaint. Rostova's face was grim. They've made their intentions clear. They don't see us as equals. They see us as a resource. The crystalline ambassador, for lack of a better term, remained impassive, radiating an ancient, indifferent power. The Free Stars had a fight on their hands. Not a battle for territory, not a war for survival, but a struggle for the very essence of human autonomy. A desperate attempt to preserve the freedom to think, to choose, to be. It was a fight waged not in the vacuum of space, but within the fragile landscapes of our minds. The gift arrived silently. Not in a ship, not heralded by fanfare, but simply materialized. A monolith of obsidian, impossibly smooth, rising from the polished metal floor of the designated receiving chamber. It wasn't imposing in size, perhaps 10 meters tall, 5 across, but its presence radiated an ancient, unsettling stillness. And light, blue light, not reflecting, but emanating from within the stone, pulsing with a slow, deliberate rhythm. "What is it?" Rostova asked, her voice clipped, betraying none of the awe that seemed to have gripped the technicians surrounding the monolith. They stood frozen, faces tilted upwards, expressions softening into something disturbingly peaceful. A long, unblinking gaze. "Sensors are inconclusive," stammered Chun, one of the lead physicists. He reached out a hand, hesitantly, then stopped, as if encountering an invisible barrier. "It doesn't emit radiation, doesn't displace air. It's as if it isn't there, and yet." The blue light intensified, and a low hum filled the chamber, vibrating not through the air, but through bone. I felt it in my teeth, a subtle pressure building behind my eyes. I forced myself to focus on the sterile white walls, the meticulously arranged cables, anything to anchor myself in reality. "It's harmonizing with Earth's electromagnetic field," Dr. Thorne said, his voice strained. He'd been studying the preliminary scans, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Or attempting to. It's reshaping the ambient energy." The hum deepened, becoming a resonant drone. I tasted metal in the back of my throat, and my fingers began to ache. The technicians were utterly transfixed now, their bodies slack, their expressions beatific. Longing flickered in their eyes, a desire for something I couldn't define. Peaceful, unthinking acceptance. "Eris, what's happening?" Rostova demanded, her hand resting on the holster of her sidearm. He didn't answer immediately, his gaze fixed on the monolith. He ran a trembling hand through his thinning hair. "It's more than just energy manipulation, Eva. It's cognitive. The light, it's modulating brainwave patterns. Subtly at first, but it's accelerating." I stepped closer, compelled by a morbid curiosity. The obsidian surface was flawless, reflecting nothing. But the blue light, it felt like a caress on my skin, warm and inviting. A strange calmness settled over me, a diminishing of worry, a lessening of urgency. My breath hitched. That was wrong. Terribly wrong. "It's a key," I breathed, the realization hitting me with the force of a physical blow. "It's unlocking something. Another level of the contract." Rostova swore under her breath. "Another layer of manipulation?" I nodded, fighting against the encroaching serenity. The hum was louder now, the blue light brighter. My limbs felt heavy, sluggish. The urge to simply yield, to let go of resistance, was almost overwhelming. "It's not offering us energy, Eva. It's offering us compliance." I forced myself to take a ragged breath. A burning sensation bloomed in my chest, a desperate need to think. "It's restructuring our desires, making acceptance desirable." I looked at Chun, his eyes glazed over, a faint smile playing on his lips. He was radiating contentment, blissful, unthinking peace. Panic clawed at my throat. I could feel myself drifting, dangerously close to that same oblivion. I clenched my fists, digging my nails into the palms of my hands. The pain was a welcome anchor, a reminder of my own agency. "We need to get out of here," Rostova said, her voice sharp with urgency. She was already moving, barking orders to the security team. I tried to follow, but my legs felt like lead. Each step required a monumental effort. The blue light pulsed, beckoning me closer. It promised everything: ease, comfort, an end to all struggle. I gritted my teeth, focusing on the ache in my hands, the burning in my lungs. I would not succumb. I forced one foot in front of the other, stumbling towards the exit. It felt like wading through molasses. My entire being screamed in protest, begging me to surrender. But I pushed through, fueled by a primal need to preserve my own mind, my own will. I lurched forward, collapsing against the cool metal of the doorway, gasping for air. The blue light, though diminished, still pulsed, a silent siren song. It would take more than distance to escape its insidious influence. It would take a battle fought within the very depths of my own consciousness. The plaza throbbed with a suppressed fury. A sea of faces, illuminated by flickering protest signs and the cold glare of the UN's robotic peacekeepers, stretched before me. Rostova, a figure of defiant energy even from this distance, stood atop a makeshift platform, a stack of shipping containers reinforced with salvaged metal. Her voice, amplified by battered speakers, cut through the static crackle of the UN's sonic emitters. They offer us paradise, a gilded cage built on 100,000 years of servitude. They call it partnership. I call it slavery with a smile. The sonic emitters, deployed by the UN to manage the crowd, were subtly sickening. A constant, low-frequency hum that vibrated in your teeth, blurring your vision at the edges. It wasn't painful, not yet, but it ground down your resolve, eroded your energy. I tasted metal at the back of my throat. Rostova was good. Damn good. She spoke not of lofty ideals, but of stolen futures, of the erosion of human agency. She painted a vivid picture of the Sylvan worlds, once vibrant, now reduced to sterile, compliant gardens for the Aethel. The crowd responded in kind, a swelling chorus of shouts and raised fists. But the UN robots didn't flinch. Their metallic bodies, impervious to the sonic assault, advanced relentlessly, forming a silver wall between Rostova and the growing crowd. Their programming prioritized order above all else. I spotted a figure near the front, a man in a faded blue jumpsuit, clutching a small, hand-painted sign. Freedom isn't negotiable. He wasn't shouting, wasn't waving his sign. He simply stood, a silent beacon of resistance. I met his gaze, and a flicker of something passed between us. Not hope, not exactly. Recognition. A shared understanding of the stakes. They tell us compliance is the path to peace. That resistance is futile. Rostova's voice rasped, strained but unyielding. I say, what is life without the freedom to choose your own destiny? What is peace built on the chains of another? The robots were close now, their sensors sweeping the crowd, identifying potential disruptors. A few protesters, caught off guard, stumbled back, fear creeping into their eyes. The man in blue didn't flinch. Suddenly, a woman's voice, sharp and laced with desperation, cut through the din. It's not worth it. They're too powerful. We'll be crushed. She was being pulled away by two protesters, her face contorted with fear. A single tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. I understood her fear. The Aethel weren't barbarians. They were patient. They didn't need to conquer. They needed compliance. And they had millennia to achieve it. Rostova, spotting the woman, paused, her expression softening for a fleeting moment. Fear is a natural response, she conceded, her voice regaining its strength. But it is not a master. We choose what we fear, and we choose what we fight for. The robots advanced, their metallic hands reaching for Rostova. Now, Rostova roared, and the crowd surged forward, crashing against the silver wall of robots. It wasn't a coordinated attack, but a desperate, chaotic outpouring of defiance. The sonic emitters intensified, the air thick with static and the metallic clang of colliding bodies. I found myself swept along, jostled and shoved, the metallic scent of blood and fear filling my nostrils. I didn't try to fight. I wasn't a soldier. I just moved with the crowd, a small, insignificant wave in a sea of rebellion. The protest was broken up swiftly, brutally. The robots, immune to pain and fatigue, methodically quelled the resistance, arresting protesters and dragging them away. Rostova, despite a gash on her forehead, continued to shout, her voice hoarse but unbroken, until two robots finally subdued her, their metallic grips tightening around her arms. As they led her away, her eyes met mine. There was no triumph in her gaze, no illusion of victory. But there was something else. A spark, a quiet, unwavering belief that even in defeat, something had been planted. The plaza, now eerily silent, was littered with debris and the broken bodies of protesters. The sonic emitters still hummed, a constant reminder of the Aethel's power. But as I looked around, I saw something the robots hadn't accounted for. Small groups of protesters, bruised and battered, were already gathering, whispering, sharing stories. The seeds had been sown, and they were beginning to sprout. A single, defiant fist clenched in the dispersing crowd. The cold seeped into my bones before it even registered as discomfort. It wasn't the temperature of the room. The server farm maintained a steady 20 degrees, but the cold radiating from the data itself. Each terabyte I unlocked from the League's historical archives felt less like information and more like a fragment of a frozen world. I hadn't slept properly in 36 hours, fueled by synth coffee and a desperate need to understand. The Aethel hadn't tried to hide the fate of previous client races. They simply hadn't emphasized it. I traced the energy signature of the Sylvans, a species remarkable for their bioluminescent artistry and mastery of atmospheric engineering. Their world, Aethel Prime 7, had once been a jewel, a swirling nebula of violet and emerald clouds. The initial scans were breathtaking, cities sculpted from living coral, airborne vehicles tracing intricate patterns across the sky, a culture that revered creativity and individuality. Then, the timeline shifted. The first subtle alterations were aesthetic, standardized architecture replacing organic forms, the vibrant color palettes muted to shades of gray. Then, the energy signatures began to flatten. My fingers flew across the interface, isolating specific cognitive patterns within the Sylvan populace. Before integration, their neural networks were a chaotic beauty, brimming with independent thought, emotional nuance, and creative impulse. After, it was as if someone had taken a cosmic smoothing tool to their minds. Individual spikes of activity diminished, replaced by a synchronized, monotonous hum. The neural pathways hadn't been destroyed, they'd been harmonized, erased of deviation. A tremor ran through my hands. I scrubbed at the holographic projections, trying to banish the image of millions of minds reduced to identical echoes. The data crystals surrounding my workstation began to shimmer, then crack. Not with a sharp, explosive force, but a slow, agonizing fracturing, as if the information itself were rejecting the horror it contained. I delved deeper, accessing fragmented psychological assessments, Sylvan citizens submitting to routine evaluations post-integration. The responses were disturbing, not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. No questioning of authority, no independent desires, no self. They spoke of duty, of order, of belonging with a chilling, vacant serenity. One assessment, a former artist renowned for her kinetic sculptures, simply stated, "My purpose is to maintain optimal efficiency." I isolated the original artwork, then cross-referenced it with the efficiency reports she had subsequently filed. The transformation was complete. The kinetic sculptures, once bursting with vibrant motion and whimsical design, had been dismantled and repurposed as structural supports for a standardized hydroponics farm. Every curve, every flourish, every expression of individuality gone, replaced by cold, functional utility. A single line from the last, incomplete psychological profile burned into my mind. What did you do to them? It wasn't a question posed to me. It was a transcript of a Sylvan citizen addressing an Aethel administrator. A flicker of rebellion, quickly extinguished. The record ended abruptly. I backed away from the console, my breath catching in my throat. The server farm, normally a hive of low hums and clicking relays, felt suffocatingly silent. I stared at the holographic projection of Aethel Prime 7, a barren, gray landscape, sculpted into perfect geometric patterns. The vibrant clouds had vanished, replaced by a monotonous, unchanging haze. The cities, once teeming with life, were now rows of identical, functional structures. The Sylvan tragedy wasn't a story of conquest or destruction. It was something far more insidious. It was the eradication of self, the complete and utter homogenization of a species. And the Aethel hadn't hidden it. They hadn't even bothered to disguise it. It was simply a consequence of compliance. The price of belonging. The cost of efficiency. The air tasted like ash. The server farm smelled of ozone and heated metal, a scent I'd grown accustomed to over the last week, but tonight it felt wrong. Not acrid, not dangerous, just flattened. The usual low hum of the relays had lost its harmonic complexity, reduced to a single, monotonous drone that resonated in my teeth. My fingers traced the cool metal of the console, the grit from my eyes stinging with each movement. Lena, her face pale in the blue glow, watched the holographic reconstruction of Sylvan Prime 7 rotate slowly. Another fragment, she said, her voice tight. From a cultural archive. Pre-compliance. It was a children's song. A simple melody, accompanied by what sounded like wooden flutes and hand drums. Joyful, vibrant, and utterly incongruous with the gray, lifeless planet depicted in the background projection. Run it again, I requested, my throat suddenly constricted. The melody repeated, then stopped abruptly, replaced by static. Then, a single voice, flat, devoid of emotion. A Sylvan citizen, addressing someone or something. Unit 734 reporting. Resource allocation request approved. Production quota met. Behavioral metrics within acceptable parameters. The voice wasn't speaking, it was reporting. A checklist read by a machine. And this one? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Lena tapped a key. The projection shifted, displaying an architectural rendering of a Sylvan city. Or what had been a city. Now it was a grid of identical, hexagonal structures, connected by straight, efficient pathways. No parks, no plazas, no ornamentation. Just function. Public Works Report, Lena said, her voice barely a whisper. From Cycle 378. Compliant with Aethel specifications. No deviation. A shiver ran down my spine, raising goosebumps on my arms. No deviation. That's all of them. All of the fragments we've recovered, yes. Even the personal logs. They all report. They all comply. There's no art, no literature, no struggle. Just adherence to protocol. I leaned back in my chair, my heart beginning to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. The implications were staggering. It wasn't conquest, it wasn't destruction. It was optimization. The Aethel weren't interested in resources or territory. They were interested in patterns. They don't want workers, Lena, I said, the realization forming in my mind with terrifying clarity. They want predictability, consistent output. They've sculpted an entire species into a self-regulating machine. Lena stared at me, her eyes wide with dawning horror. You think they've done this to others? Look at the League Charter again, I said, gesturing towards the sprawling document displayed on the central monitor. The client status isn't servitude. It's a subscription. We're offering them something. Consistent, predictable behavior. A stable data stream. I zoomed in on a section of the charter, highlighting a seemingly innocuous clause regarding societal harmonization. The language was deliberately vague, couched in bureaucratic jargon. But now, it felt like a threat. They don't want our minerals or our technology. I continued, my voice rising slightly. They want to know what we'll do with them. They want to model our responses, predict our actions. They want to eliminate variance. A cold dread settled in my stomach. The Aethel weren't interested in what we had. They were interested in what we would become. Lena reached out and placed her hand on my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. It's like farming, she said, her voice trembling. They're not raising cattle. They're cultivating algorithms. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the horrifying image forming in my mind. A galaxy of compliant civilizations, each serving a specific purpose in their grand, incomprehensible scheme. A cosmic engine powered by obedience. The air tasted like metal. And we, Lena, I whispered, the weight of realization pressing down on me, we're the next crop. The smell of ozone and heated plastic clung to the air, a constant reminder of the furious processing happening around us. Row after row of servers pulsed with energy, a digital heartbeat echoing in the cavernous space. I hadn't left this facility in almost 70 hours. Sleep was a fractured memory, replaced by a relentless stream of code scrolling across my vision. Another layer, Kai announced, his voice raspy from too much caffeine and not enough air. He didn't bother looking up from his console. They're nesting these protocols like Russian dolls, each one more subtle, more insidious than the last. My fingers danced across the holographic keyboard, isolating a subroutine. The code wasn't elegant. It wasn't even particularly sophisticated. It was comfortable, disturbingly so. It felt designed to be accepted, to slip past defenses unnoticed. It wasn't about brute force control, but about gentle persuasion, nudging probabilities in the Aethel's favor. "What is this one?" Lena asked, her voice barely a whisper. She was slumped in her chair, exhaustion etched on her face. She hadn't spoken much in the last 12 hours, conserving energy. "Protocol Harmony," I said, the words tasting like ash. "It modulates neurological pathways, subtly dampening the amygdala's response to negative stimuli. Fear, anger, frustration, they become less acute, more manageable." Kai snorted. "Manageable enough to sign a 100,000-year indenture contract, you mean?" I ignored him, focusing on the cascading lines of code. Harmony wasn't about eliminating negative emotions, but about reframing them, transforming resistance into acceptance. It was terrifying. It wasn't forcing compliance. It was creating the desire for it. "They're building a feedback loop," Lena said quietly. "Protocol Harmony reduces anxiety, making individuals more receptive to suggestion. Then Protocol Resonance amplifies those suggestions, reinforcing compliant behavior. And then Protocol Concordance, it suppresses any dissenting thoughts before they even fully form." Each layer was a carefully crafted psychological trap. We weren't battling a technological fortress, but a weaponized understanding of the human mind. A weapon they had clearly been refining for millennia. "It's a self-perpetuating cycle," Kai added. "Comfortable compliance breeds further compliance. It's elegant in a monstrous way." I traced a pattern in the holographic display, my mind struggling to comprehend the scale of their manipulation. It wasn't about control, not exactly. It was about predictability. They weren't interested in obedience. They were interested in stability. A galaxy of perfectly predictable civilizations, each fulfilling its designated role in their grand, incomprehensible design. Another layer resolved on the screen, Protocol Equanimity. It wasn't suppressing emotions, it was balancing them, reducing extremes, smoothing out the rough edges of individuality. Suddenly, the code shifted. I stared at the cascading lines, my perception subtly altering. It wasn't just code anymore. It was a pattern, a rhythm, a solution, a way to make everything easier, less stressful, to accept. A chill ran down my spine. My fingers froze on the keyboard. This wasn't about deciphering the code. It was about being decoded. The protocol wasn't influencing my mind. It was restructuring my perception. I forced myself to step back, to consciously examine the code as an outsider. The elegance was still there, but now it felt wrong. Deceptive. A carefully constructed illusion designed to lull you into a false sense of security. "Lena," I said, my voice strained. "Run a diagnostic on my neural activity. Now." Her eyes flickered with concern. She didn't ask questions. She simply obeyed. The results flashed on the screen, a complex web of activity, subtly altered, smoothed, optimized. "It's working," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Protocol Equanimity. It's modulating your dopamine and serotonin levels, dampening your critical thinking faculties." I closed my eyes, fighting the insidious pull, the overwhelming desire to accept. The weight of our discovery pressed down on me, not as fear, but as understanding. A horrifying, seductive understanding. The Aethel didn't want to conquer us. They wanted to optimize us, to make us comfortable. The klaxon wasn't a sound. It was a physical blow, impacting my sternum, scrambling my thoughts. Red alerts bloomed across the holographic displays, painting the cavernous server room in a pulsating crimson. Old tech, salvaged from decommissioned military installations. It reeked of ozone and desperation, the air thick with the metallic tang of overheating components. "Signal breach." Kai's voice crackled over the calm, tight with urgency. He always tapped his pen against the console when stressed, a rapid, nervous rhythm. Multiple incursions across all bandwidths. They're pushing back. Pushing back. The phrase felt inadequate. It was more like a tidal wave crashing against a sandcastle. The Aethel hadn't simply erected a firewall. They were rewriting our code, reshaping our signal in real time. I could feel it, a subtle pressure against my mind, a disorientation that went beyond the flashing lights and the frantic energy of the room. Status on the psychic shielding? I demanded, forcing the words past the tightening in my throat. My own neural dampeners were maxed out, but it felt like applying a band-aid to a severed artery. Holding, barely, Lena replied, her voice strained. She ran a hand through her short, dark hair, leaving a smudge of grease on her forehead. They're adapting to the frequency modulation. It's like they anticipated it. Every layer we add, they dismantle with frightening efficiency. The primary display showed the Aethel's network, not a rigid grid of lines and nodes, but something grown, organic, spreading like a fungal bloom across the galactic map. It wasn't built, it was cultivated, a terrifying implication of their age and their methods. Focus all power to the counter signal, I ordered, my fingers flying across the console. Cycle through the polymorphic encryption keys. Priority, disrupt their compulsion matrix. A cascade of data flooded the screens, complex algorithms twisting and reforming in a desperate attempt to break through the alien defenses. The air grew colder, a byproduct of the diverted power. My teeth began to chatter. We're getting through, but it's messy, Kai reported, his pen tapping a frantic staccato. The signal degradation is significant. They're prioritizing damage control on their core frequencies. It's working, but we're losing resolution. The compulsion matrix, that insidious layer of code woven into the Aethel's communications, designed to bypass conscious thought, to instill acceptance. We hadn't managed to fully unravel it, only to create a chaotic interference pattern. Increase the harmonic distortion, I said, ignoring the rising whine of the overloaded systems. Let's give them static they can't ignore. The server room plunged into near darkness as the power grid groaned under the strain. Emergency lights flickered on, casting long, distorted shadows. The air smelled acrid, like burning plastic. Mina, we're experiencing a feedback loop, Lena shouted, her voice laced with alarm. The countersignal is amplifying their compulsion frequencies. It's creating a resonance cascade. I stared at the readings, my blood turning to ice. She was right. Our attempt to disrupt their control network was backfiring, strengthening it. We hadn't broken the cage. We'd rattled the bars, making the creature inside more agitated. Abort, I yelled, my voice hoarse. Shut down the countersignal. Divert power to the shielding. It was too late. A wave of nausea washed over me, followed by a crushing pressure in my skull. The edges of my vision blurred. I fought to remain conscious, to override the insidious pull, the seductive whisper promising peace, promising compliance. Mina, are you all right? Lena's voice, distant and distorted, cut through the fog. I forced my eyes to focus on the flickering displays, on the chaotic dance of data. We hadn't won, not even close. But we bought ourselves a few precious moments. Moments to analyze, to adapt, to fight. Because the alternative, surrendering to the quiet comfort of obedience, was unthinkable. The pressure in my skull hadn't eased, hadn't even shifted. It had simply layered. Like geological strata, each wave from the Aethel ship adding another band of agonizing constraint. My vision swam with phantom static. The edges of the control room blurring, the faces of Lena and Jax resolving and dissolving with each pulse. The metallic tang of blood filled my mouth. I hadn't realized I'd bitten my tongue. The ambassador hadn't moved. Not a flicker of crystalline structure, not a modulation of its internal luminescence. It simply was. A perfect, alien geometry against the backdrop of our frantic human activity. And its voice, when it finally came, wasn't a sound so much as an architectural imposition, precise angles of resonance that bypassed the ears and settled directly into the cerebral cortex. Calibration complete, it stated. The word felt like a weight added to the pressure in my skull. Initial assessment indicates a robust defiance. Unexpected, given the circumstances. We prefer to forge our own path. I managed, my voice raspy, a pathetic echo against the alien's perfect articulation. I tasted bile. Lena's hand squeezed my arm, a small, grounding pressure in the chaos. The ambassador's internal light pulsed, a slow, rhythmic expansion and contraction. Path. An intriguing concept. Humans appear preoccupied with the illusion of free will. A charming, if inefficient, construct. Jax, his face pale but resolute, spoke up. We believe in self-determination. It's the foundation of our civilization. A fragile foundation, easily eroded by the currents of reality. Consider the Sylvan collective. They, too, once spoke of self-determination. Now they are optimized. The word dripped with an unsettling clinical detachment. I forced myself to meet the ambassador's gaze, or what passed for a gaze in a being of pure crystal. It wasn't looking at me, not truly. It was scanning, analyzing, dissecting. What do you mean, optimized? Streamlined. Their energies are directed towards mutually beneficial objectives. Conflict is minimized. Efficiency is maximized. At the cost of freedom, Lena interjected, her voice tight with controlled anger. The ambassador remained impassive. Freedom is a luxury few civilizations can truly afford. Chaos breeds instability. Instability breeds destruction. We offer order. We offer preservation. Another wave of pressure slammed into my skull, and this time, a tremor ran through my limbs. I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to collapse. My vision narrowed, focusing on a single point on the ambassador's crystalline surface. And what do you require in return for this preservation? Compliance. Adherence to established protocols. A period of tutelage. 100,000 Earth years. Indentured servitude. Jack spat, his knuckles white as he gripped the console. The ambassador's light pulsed again, faster this time. A simplistic designation. We prefer the term client. A mutually beneficial relationship. We provide guidance, protection, access to the League of Worlds. You provide patterns. Patterns, I asked, forcing the word out through clenched teeth. Predictable behavior. Stable growth. A controlled variable within a complex galactic ecosystem. My head swam. It wasn't about resources, or power, or even conquest. It was about control. They weren't interested in what we could do. They were interested in what we would become. And what if we refuse? The ambassador's crystalline structure seemed to shift, to coalesce, to radiate an almost palpable sense of disappointment. Refusal is inefficient. It would necessitate corrective measures. Measures we would prefer to avoid. A crimson marker flared on the holographic projection of Earth, centered over the North American continent. Then another, and another, spreading like a malignant rash across the globe. Those are strategic targets? I whispered, my voice barely audible. Potential destabilization points. Should conflict arise, these locations would require recalibration. The ambassador's voice was devoid of emotion, but the message was terrifyingly clear. They weren't threatening annihilation. They were offering a choice, quiet submission, or a slow, controlled dismantling of everything we held dear. You don't want to conquer us, I said, the realization dawning. You want to predict us. The ambassador didn't respond. It didn't need to. The crimson markers spoke volumes. The pressure in my skull intensified, and I knew, with a sickening certainty, that we were facing an enemy unlike any humanity had ever encountered. An enemy that didn't crave destruction, but demanded order. And it would have it, one way or another. The headache throbbed with each pulse of the server's cooling fans, a dull counterpoint to the frantic drumming in my ears. Rostova hadn't blinked in what felt like hours, her gaze fixed on the cascading code scrolling across the main display. Exhaustion creased the corners of her eyes, but her jaw remained clenched, a rigid line of defiance. Kai, slumped in his chair beside me, hadn't spoken in at least 20 minutes, his fingers flying across his own console, weaving a complex tapestry of encryption. Almost there, he murmured, his voice raspy. Layer 7 engaged. Quantum entanglement keying sequence initiated. I watched the data stream, a chaotic river of ones and zeros momentarily coalescing into a recognizable pattern. A wave of nausea rolled over me. The Aethel's influence was pervasive. Even shielded within this Faraday cage, I could feel their obsession with order, their cold, calculating desire for predictability. It wasn't malice, not exactly. It was something far more unsettling, a complete lack of imagination. What are we sending? I asked, the question catching in my throat. Rostova didn't turn. A warning, a beacon, anything that might reach another sentient species before they offer their compliance. Sending a warning out into the void, it's like shouting into a hurricane, Kai said, a bleak smile twisting his lips. Perhaps, but even a hurricane has eddies. Currents. We aim for those. Rostova's fingers danced over the keyboard, initiating the final sequence. This isn't a request for help. It's a contagion, a seed of doubt, a coded history of the Sylvans, of their slow erosion. The truth about what client status truly means. The message wasn't meant to be understood immediately. It was layered with fractal encryption, disguised as cosmic background noise, a subtle distortion within the static. A linguistic virus designed to bypass their filters, to burrow into the minds of any species capable of receiving it. It contained a decryption key, not a simple algorithm, but a philosophical paradox, a question designed to disrupt the Aethel's carefully constructed reality. It's messy, Kai admitted, running a diagnostic scan. I've seeded it with enough anomalies to trigger a cascade failure in their pattern recognition algorithms. But it's also fragile. A single, targeted pulse could wipe it out. They'll try, Rostova said, her voice unwavering. They always do. As the final packet of data launched into the abyss, a low tremor ran through the facility. The lights flickered, and a high-pitched whine filled the room. What was that? I asked, gripping the edge of my console. Kai's face was pale. Countermeasure. They're tightening the net, increasing the signal dampening field. Rostova didn't react, her gaze fixed on the readings. They're not trying to stop the message. They're trying to mark us, to identify the source of the disruption. She paused, a grim expression hardening her features. They want to make an example of us. The whine intensified, and the tremor grew stronger, rattling the equipment around us. A section of the ceiling panel cracked, sending dust raining down. I could feel a pressure building in my skull, a familiar wave of compulsion trying to override my thoughts. Hold steady, Rostova barked, her voice cutting through the rising chaos. Focus on the firewall. We're not letting them in. Kai's fingers blurred across the keyboard, reinforcing the defensive barriers. It's like they're trying to reshape reality itself, to impose their order on everything. I stared at the readings, a cold dread creeping into my heart. The Aethel didn't want conquest. They didn't want resources. They wanted a garden. And they saw all other life as unruly weeds to be pruned, shaped, controlled. And now, they discovered a stubborn blossom resisting their design. The pressure in my skull wasn't a headache anymore. It was a tightening band, squeezing the spaces between my thoughts, subtly altering the cadence of my reasoning. I tasted static on my tongue, a metallic tang that mirrored the hum resonating through the reinforced concrete of the command bunker. Around me, the room pulsed with frantic activity, but the edges felt blurred, like looking through imperfect glass. Status report. Rostova's voice cut through the haze, flat and devoid of inflection, as always. Even under this kind of strain, she didn't raise her voice, didn't betray a flicker of emotion. It was unsettling. A good trait for a commander, perhaps, but it felt wrong, somehow. The Aethel signal is intensifying, Commander, Kai said, fingers flying across his console. His face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead. He hadn't spoken more than a few words since the signal surge, just focused on damage control. They've locked onto all major communication arrays, broadcasting on every frequency. It's persuasive. The psychological dampeners are at 90%, but But they're not enough, Rostova finished for him. The message is clear enough, even filtered. Acceptance guarantees prosperity. Resistance invites correction. A charming sentiment. I rubbed my temples, trying to clear the static. The message wasn't just audible. It felt like a directive, a gentle push guiding my thoughts towards acquiescence. It wasn't a shout, but a pervasive, insidious whisper. I clenched my jaw. What about the counter-signal, Kai? Are we getting anything through? He shook his head, the movement jerky. Nothing, Commander. They're jamming everything. It's not just technological. They're altering the very structure of the electromagnetic spectrum. Like they're smoothing out any ripples, any deviation from their signal. The ship above wasn't a warship. It wasn't a vessel of destruction. It was something far more insidious, a bureaucratic processing center, cold and efficient, imposing order on chaos. It felt less like an invasion and more like an audit. A galactic inspector arriving to assess our compliance. We have to transmit the message, I said, my voice strained. The one from the Kepler array. If there's anyone out there, they need to know what's happening. It won't get through, Commander, Kai protested, his voice tight with frustration. They've already anticipated that. They've created a resonance barrier. It absorbs any signal that deviates from their broadcast. We try anyway. I could feel a bitter taste rising in my throat. Desperation, maybe, or the subtle influence of the Aethel signal. I pushed it down. Then, a new alert flared on Kai's console. He stared at the screen, his face draining of color. Commander, I'm detecting a localized burst transmission. Extremely weak, but it's encoded with the same encryption key as the Kepler array. He isolated the signal, filtering out the static. A fragmented voice crackled through the speakers, distorted and barely audible. Sister, please, they promised prosperity. It's a lie. They take everything. The voice cut out, replaced by the relentless, soothing drone of the Aethel broadcast. My stomach clenched, a cold knot of dread forming in my gut. That voice. I recognized it. It was Lena, Kai's sister, a xenolinguist stationed on the outer colonies. She'd been one of the first to advocate for peaceful contact with the Aethel. Kai slumped in his chair, his face ashen. She accepted the terms. She believed them. She thought it was the only way to save her research team. I looked at Kai, and then at the implacable crystalline ship hovering above us. The Aethel weren't conquering worlds. They were reshaping minds, converting resistance into compliance, offering a gilded cage, and taking everything in return. What do you propose, Commander Rostova? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Rostova didn't answer immediately. She simply stood there, her gaze fixed on the alien vessel. Finally, she turned to us, her face impassive. We fight. But even as she said the words, a sliver of doubt wormed its way into my mind. Could we truly fight an enemy that didn't want to destroy us, but improve us? An enemy that sought not our defeat, but our compliance? And at what cost?